look at the world, and since February 2022, the amount of change we've seen of that, COVID, blah blah. Um, so sometimes things go really fast. So I'm not going to put a timeline on it, but generally speaking, in spite of China's economic issues right now, the reality is the the world's balance of power is gradually shifting eastward. There's no denying that.
Hey guys, welcome to Capital Cosm. Today I have a very special returning guest. It is Ladislas of the Wandering Investor. Ladislas, thank you for coming back on the show.
The pleasure's mine, Danny.
I like the fact that you're matching with the background that I've got over here. It's a very apropos shirt you got there. But as it goes with any of these videos, guys, nothing on this video is financial advice. Neither Ladislas nor I are financial advisors, so please do your own due diligence. With that said, Ladislas, I know this is your second time on the show, but for people who may have not seen the first episode between you and I, briefly give us a background on who you are.
Sure. So bachelor's in Canada, then business and law school in Australia. Then I worked in corporates for 7 years, mostly in Africa. So expat for Nestle, the big food company. My last role there was sitting on the executive board in charge of the milk business for a few West African countries. Then I left approximately 7 years ago. And since then, I've been a full-time investor managing my own capital. And I started a boutique consultancy called The Wandering Investor. I have a YouTube channel where I talk about internationalization and diversification strategies.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, I mean, I wanted to bring you on because the world is in a very tumultuous state at the moment. The West, which is where I live and a lot of my audience lives, is kind of losing its grip as the world source of power and stability, etc. So, with that in mind, Ladislas, where are the places that you're looking at in particular when it comes to being a nomad, relocating, etc., away from the West?
Yeah, the situation has become a bit complicated in the West, that's for sure. Look, from a real estate point of view, if we're going to tackle it from that angle, as long as interest rates are relatively high or keep going up or are stable or not really going down much, I'm not too interested in these markets. In many of these countries as well, especially in Europe, the demographics are quite bad as well. So, when I look at a lot of these markets, the question I ask myself is, what's the catalyst? What's the next catalyst? What's going to drive prices higher? And I fail to see anything too compelling. And in many cases, even if there were capital gains, a lot of them just get captured by taxes. So, ideally, what people who have a lot of freedom in their lives, they would want to relocate to low tax countries and run businesses independently online or such, and two, also invest in countries with a bit less geopolitical tension. So if you were to ask me right now, would I see the point in investing in Europe right now? Where I'm in Europe right now as we're speaking, hence, it's a little cold. Um, when our whole energy policy has been turned upside down, where we are now paying 3 to 4 times the price for electricity and gas that we used to pay for before the war, and we're not seeing any de-escalation in sight with Russia. You can think of whatever you want to think about the conflict with Russia, but the economic impact is you just cannot dispute. If you are in charge of CapEx strategy for a large multinational, would you be headed into Europe right now to build a factory? If you had to allocate CapEx. No, because you don't even know the price of energy and also the price. The price and also if you're even going to get enough energy. So a few months ago, We, with a group of investors, we were in Hungary and we met with partners of a big law firm there. And there was a lady, a partner of that law firm, who used to work very closely with the Hungarian government in terms of with regards to energy policy. And she essentially said, yeah, for the next, 4 to 5 years, um, we in Central Europe are very vulnerable. If the weather's warm, we'll be fine. But if one, we have a very cold winter, or two, if there is an act of sabotage on one of the Turkish pipelines, then we have a big problem. We run out of electricity. So when I look at this, and again, Hungary is not the worst case at all. Asset prices are really cheap there. So in many respects, they kind of reflect that. Um, but why would I want this level of geopolitical risk that's generally not built into the prices when I can allocate my capital elsewhere, where you can find cash markets, where there's no leverage in the system, where valuations are cheap, and there isn't that sort of risk. So when I take a step back, I'd rather look elsewhere. So personally, I've been not just looking, I've been investing quite heavily in Latin America. Um, a lot of these markets are very cheap. They didn't budge for a decade. They're cheap in dollar terms. They're cheap locally, according to, even local incomes. Um, so in many ways, it's safer and there's less downside in such markets than in Western developed markets. And then in some of these countries, if you yourself base yourself there and you're not a US person, you can really benefit from massive tax reductions as well.
Hey guys, quick pause. I won't take too much of your time, but I just wanted to let you know that if you want to use and read the same newsletter that I do, Capitalist Exploits, we have a special $1,000 discount exclusively for Capital Cosm viewers of this channel. You simply have to click on the link down below, get your $1,000 discount. Super stoked about this. I discovered Chris and Brad's newsletter, Capitalist Exploits, 4 years ago. It set me on my investment journey. I attribute a ton of what I know to that newsletter. So if you haven't already, check them out. Click the link down below to learn more. Take advantage of this $1,000 discount. You're not going to find it anywhere else. All right, now let's get back to the video. Yeah, so Latin America, any like countries in particular that
Yes, I made some investments in Mexico, but prices shot up quite a bit. I'm active. I'm doing a big remodeling job right now in Colombia, in Medellin. So this is a market that's quite interesting that gives good cap rates. The city's beautiful. It's an apartment you can enjoy for yourself and then rent out the rest of the year and make some decent money. And again, not expensive. You're looking at in square meters, for prime property between 1,500 and $2,000 per square meter. So, which is really not that much according to global standards. Even Ecuador right now, in some places, even though they've had a lot of issues with gangs, with violence, not the whole country is violent. And the cities that don't have issues with violence, you're seeing a massive influx of people coming from other parts of the country. And still, you can get some really, really cheap real estate in places like that with some half decent yields. And as we're speaking, this weekend I was making offers in Nicaragua. So there was a revolution, well, not a revolution. There were human rights issues, et cetera, with the government in 2018. Then it was under US sanctions. It's still under US sanctions. The market went down like 30% in 2018, 30, 40%. And since then, it hasn't done a thing. It hasn't gone up. But what's happening is it's still under US sanctions, but the Chinese are investing big time in Nicaragua. And that's a whole bunch of MOUs were signed with Chinese state-owned companies and private companies to build highways, railroads, gas storage facilities, a new airport. All that's coming. So Chinese money is coming in, but asset prices are still completely beaten down because everyone is just focused with America's angle on the place. But there's another ogre that's coming in. So stuff like this, where you see that there's a bit of a turnaround story, but where it's really, really cheap, that's where I'm looking at because I see it as in many regards safe. Even if things were to hit the fan, chances are asset prices won't really go down much more. Um, so that's what I'm looking at. When I'm looking for more aggressive plays, I prefer to play the stock market because that's more dynamic and I can move around quicker. Once you start going into emerging market real estate, you need to understand that generally speaking, they're pretty illiquid. So, if you try to sell a house in Nicaragua, it's not going to happen like this week. It might take a few months, maybe a year or more. So it's not like a house in the US.
Yeah. So what about El Salvador? I know they cleaned up their country quite a bit. What do you think about El
Yeah,
Salvador?
good question. So I went there because I saw the whole thing with Bukele, blah blah, turnaround story, etc. I was like, let me go have a look at this, because I can see how going from one of the most violent countries in the world to one of Latin America's safest countries would be a catalyst of some sort for business, for asset prices, for a whole bunch of things. So I took a one-way flight there actually in December. I didn't know how long I'd stay. So I landed there. I got a tax number, which you need to do business or buy property there. And I was actively looking for a deal. But what I found out was I spent 2 weeks literally traveling all over the country, is that people's optimism in terms of like the trajectory of the country has resulted in completely inflated real estate prices. So I mean, he's really cleaned up. It's super safe now. I was walking in San Salvador at night, just tall gringo walking around with his $1,500 iPhone, um, on a video call, no issue whatsoever. Had I done this 4 years ago, I would not have walked 100 meters. I would have already been in someone's trunk. So really impressive. Everyone was super optimistic. And it just translated into to high real estate prices. Essentially now San Salvador is valued at the same price as Panama City.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm happy for the people in the sense that, you know, they are the ones capturing the capital gains and not some foreign speculators. So good for them. But for these valuations to be worth it, everything needs to go according to plan. And a lot of things are going according to plan. The the business environment is changing. There's very little white collar corruption anymore. Because in Latin America, you try to get anything done, people want money, blah blah blah. Not in El Salvador. That's gone because he said, look, I put the gangsters in prison. I'm building another prison for white collar criminals. So if you get caught asking for bribes, taking bribes, etc., you're going in there. So now everyone's suddenly super clean. So if you want to do business in El Salvador now, you can do business. I mean, you're not going to have gangsters rocking up with guns and asking for protection money. You're not going to have government officials saying that you're not going to get the permit if you don't pay. That's not going to happen. You're just going to deal with the usual bureaucratic crap that you deal with in Latin America, but that your lawyer can deal with, and it'll be fine in the end. But it's possible to do business there. So I see El Salvador as a play for people who want to go do business there. But if you're hoping to speculate on asset prices, the ship's already sailed. Um, and even stuff like, and you don't see this in the figures. Um, Look, there was so much corruption before that if there's a government tender to build $100 million road, whatever, like 80% of it would be gone, like just disappear into, Panamanian accounts and US accounts and all that. But now, if there's a tender for $100 million road, guess what? Probably $95 million worth of road is going to be built. So that's not going to show in GDP figures, but in terms of actual capacity building, it's happening. So um, I see the case for El Salvador. It's really impressive what he's doing. Obviously, there are issues. I was reading that because he put about 2% of the adult population in prison. There are estimates that about 8% of those people are actually innocent. So,
How many?
that's
How many?
8% of
8%.
the, yeah. So that's a lot of innocent people that are thrown in jail, which is, you know, so there are issues for sure. So this is not a blanket, support statement for Bukele, but people like him. Do not, I absolutely do not question the election results. People are all for him, and he's making the country move forward. But yeah, there are a few issues for sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple countries that are aligned with let's call it the BRICS bloc, namely Nicaragua. You mentioned there's Chinese money coming in,
Yeah.
Colombia as well. They're more so kind of aligned with China there. Any countries that are neutral that you're looking at? Because that's one consideration that kind of is in my
I
view
mean,
as well.
Colombia's a bit, I mean, they have this far left president, but then they have all these like DA and American bases there. And,
Mm,
so it's hard to say that they're BRICS aligned. They're just playing a bit both sides. So many ways a bit neutral. Even Brazil, people say Brazil BRICS, but Brazil's actually a bit in between. Um, most of these countries are a bit in between, to be honest with you. Just some of them are very pro-Western. Like right now, Argentina is taking a complete pro-Western tilt. Others are very pro-BRICS, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, places like that. But others are really just in between and playing a bit of both.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So now, when it comes to getting a passport, what are some of the best passport countries, or in terms of just ease of use? I know Turkey, you've got to do something along the lines of buy like some form of real estate over 200 or $300,000. You can get a passport that way. Any other good ones out there in your opinion?
Yeah, so look, there are a few ways to get a passport. One, through ancestry. So if you have ancestors that were from country X and you can claim that. Two, if you actually spend time in a country, if you go live in Argentina for 2 years, another year of processing, you'll get it in approximately 3 years. So there's a few countries where actually most countries, if you move there, eventually you can get the passport, though not really in Asia. But in most of Europe, Latin America, you can do that. And then you can just buy one. So you can be sitting at home in Michigan and just filling out a whole bunch of KYC paperwork. And then you can become a citizen of a country. So there's a few Caribbean countries. So I've helped customers with this. You pay essentially $130,000, and then 7, 8 months later, you get a passport of like Saint Lucia or Dominica. So that's one way. Personally, I find that, so that's fine. That's what most people do. So 95% of people go for Caribbean passports like that, which is fine. Personally, again, I'm a little bit more out there. I find that getting passports from countries that are not aligned with the West makes more sense for Westerners, right? So as a Westerner getting a Caribbean passport, cool, but is it really a plan B
It's kind of
when these
redundant.
islands are entirely dependent on what the US, Canada, the UK, and the EU says to them? That's questionable. But when you get a Turkish passport, when you get an Egyptian passport, that's a different story. So are they great? Is like, for example, is a Turkish passport a great travel document? I mean, it doesn't get you access to the West essentially, but Middle East, Asia, Latin America, Balkan countries, Eastern Europe generally, you can travel around with a Turkish passport without any issues. So that's fine. Um, and you get a passport of a country that is, sure, it's part of NATO, but it's not really entirely part of NATO. Let's put it this way. Suddenly the West were to declare war to Russia. I'm pretty sure that Turkey on day one would be like, sorry, we're staying out of this. So that's kind of the use case, is having a passport that is geopolitically not aligned with your Western passport. Suddenly, so for example, if you were to want to make an investment in your own name in a country that is very much aligned with China or Russia, so for example, if you want to make investments in Venezuela, if you want to make investments in even China, in Russia, um, again, this is not encouraging people to, evade sanctions and all that, just, giving as examples. Um, you can then use your Turkish identity. So if suddenly, I don't know, something happens with Taiwan, etc., and you had a brokerage account in Hong Kong with a bunch of really, really cheap Hong Kong stocks right now. I mean, Hong Kong is dirt cheap. Some of these companies are just, it's ridiculous. Like P ratios of below 10, double digit dividend yield and cash on the balance sheet and like half of market cap. It's ridiculous. So, people would want to buy this right now. I can understand if you're patient. But, you know, if you're buying stuff like that right now, it's a bit of a long-term play because again, what's the catalyst? Because it could stay cheap for a while. But your biggest risk as a Westerner is getting caught up in secondary sanctions or whatever. Like, China, Taiwan issues, boom. And we know what the US does and what Europe does when they don't like someone, boom, sanctions. And then you end up with Russian ADRs in your brokerage account that you can't shift. And then the country there, if you had Russian stocks directly in Russia, they also freeze you out as a retaliation. So you get caught. I mean, I'm saying this because I got caught. So if I were to
So did
buy
I.
in yeah, yeah. So yeah, these great value Russian stocks that didn't turn out too well. So, again, you have a Turkish passport. Well, you open your brokerage account in Hong Kong with a Turkish identity, and when things hit the fan, probably you'll be fine.
Gotcha. What is the importance of having an additional passport? I know a lot of people here in the West, in the United States, like myself, a lot of people here don't even have passports to begin with. But let's say you do have an American passport. Why is it so important, especially nowadays, to have a second or third passport?
Cool. So look, I've helped a lot of people obtain second passports, including a lot of Americans. Is it important? I mean, objectively, for 99% of people, it's not. Like, I mean, it's a pretty expensive toy to have, right? But it depends what one, your outlook on life is, and two, how deep you want to go into international investing and diversification. Like, for example, I'm into that. That's what I do. I travel around full time. I go into emerging markets. I do deals all over. I just, I literally all over. Um, I've done countries deals in like West African countries 5 years after a civil war. I'm amongst the first foreign investors to go back in, and I'm buying stuff. So for me, it's important. Other people, they want an escape plan if they feel that, society's decaying and they want a long-term alternative for their descendants. Because again, like if you buy a Turkish passport, and it's very simple, you just buy for 400K of real estate in Turkey, or you deposit 500K in a Turkish bank account for 3 years. That gets you, your spouse, and your underage children Turkish citizenship. And then it goes down the generations. So each time you have a kid or your kids have kids, they just need to go through the proper um, process at the Turkish embassy or consulate, wherever the kid was born, to register the kid. And then it just goes down the generations. So, maybe the Turkish passport for you is mostly a bar story, and like your Hong Kong brokerage. Is it worth it? Probably not. But, if you have kids or you're planning on having kids and you educate them and make sure that they then follow the process later on when they have their kids, you are giving all your descendants this amazing alternative and call option on a new world.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of a new world, for the last 100 years or so, the United States, Europe, the West in general was the seat of the world empire. Now it's kind of that's slowly starting to dissipate away. Where do you see that power shifting over, let's say, the next 20 years? Is it going to move east?
Look, I think it's really hard to put a timeline on these things. It's really hard to put a timeline. Some things take a lot longer than we think they should. I don't know, price of gold, price of silver. Um, and other things just, suddenly in like 2 weeks, a whole bunch of things happen. Like, if we look at the world and since February 2022, the amount of change we've seen above that, COVID, blah, blah. Um, so sometimes things go really fast. So I'm not going to put a timeline on it, but generally speaking, in spite of China's economic issues right now, the reality is the the world's balance of power is gradually shifting eastward. There's no denying that.
Right. So let's move away from the uh, kind of like the nomad geopolitical stuff here, and let's just focus on what you think outside from, let's say, real estate or um, individual countries. What are some of the other assets that you're looking at? You mentioned stocks, but then stocks and what exactly? Are you looking at commodities? Are you looking at what exactly are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean a few things. Commodities for sure. Again, this is not a recommend. Look, generally speaking, my real estate is relatively safe. That's how I view it. And then I like to be a bit more aggressive in with stocks. So sure, I have a bunch of commodity stocks. Um, but again, people just need to, figure out their own risk profile, see how comfortable they are with that. For me, that's my aggressive part of the portfolio, and I'm fine with it. But if I was 57, close to retirement, would I put everything in commodities? Absolutely not. And then I also have stocks in emerging markets, places like Uzbekistan. In a few weeks, I might take a flight to Kenya to go have a look at stocks there because they're really cheap. So it's just, I'll go to various countries and then figure out, okay, how do I play this country? If I see an interesting macro story, then it's like, how do I play it? Is it real estate? Is it debt? Is it local stocks? How do I play it?
So do you have a home base at all, or are you constantly on the move, Ladislas?
That's a bit specific, but I have multiple home bases and I'm constantly on the move.
Nice. Well, we're closing in on half an hour here. I'd want to give you the floor to give any concluding thoughts, and where also people can find you.
Sure. So look, at the end of the day, we don't know anything. We really don't. Um, you know, Summer 2019, you know, is there anyone that could have predicted where we're sitting right now? I don't know. I think a few people, on the dark web or on some platforms. But generally speaking, it's pretty hard to predict anything that's going to happen in today's world. There's just so much volatility, so much craziness. A lot of people have lost their minds. Um, so I think the first step for investors is to just admit that we don't know anything, right? I start from this perspective. I don't know anything. So how do I prevent myself from doing anything too stupid? I try to be diversified, right? So I absolutely refuse to be all in one asset class and all in one jurisdiction, right? So even if you think you're safe because all you have are normal stocks or whatever, some generic ETFs, on your brokerage account, well, one, you have everything in stocks, and two, you have everything on that one platform. Um, is this safe? Is it safe to have all your money on a single brokerage? Um, you know, Probably not. Like we don't know where the tail risk is going to come from. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm just staying very diversified. With diversification comes more complexity because obviously managing stuff everywhere is more complex and more time consuming. But that is what ensures that I sleep well at night, that I'm comfortable, and that I can stomach all the volatility because I know I'm just so diversified. And if I make mistakes, if whatever happens, I know that other parts of my portfolio are completely fine. So I think for people who want to be reasonable, right, for the coming decade or two, um, admitting that they don't know anything and being diversified are probably the most reasonable approaches.
Gotcha. And where can people find you?
TheWanderingInvestor.com. I have a newsletter as well as a YouTube channel in which I talk about international investing and unique immigration opportunities.
Fantastic. So if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, comment down below if you disagree or if you agree or disagree with any of Ladislas's points. Also, subscribe to the video so we can get more guests like Ladislas on the show. And with that said, you guys, I will see you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.